Fellow Falcoholics, what is up? Welcome to another episode of the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Knight, at Falcoholic Kevin, here to bring you our Week 14 preview as the Falcons travel to Minnesota to take on the Vikings. It is Kirk Cousins' homecoming, his return to Minnesota, and unfortunately for Cousins, it's a critical game for him. I think this could be maybe the turning point of his career here, because I think if he has a great game, that we're not going to have any more questions about benching Cousins for the rest of the year. He'll have an opportunity, obviously, to finish strong in 2024 because the schedule does get a lot easier. It's just the way it is. Whereas if Cousins really falters, especially if it looks like last week against the Chargers, the cries for Michael Penix will become very loud from the fan base, and Atlanta will basically be in a situation where they're going to need to win out the rest of the way. And if Cousins isn't getting it done, when does this coaching staff consider pulling the plug? Will they do it? I don't know. You can go and listen to Wednesday's show if you want to hear more about that. Trayshawn and I talked about it a lot on Tuesday Takes as well. This show, we're going to mostly focus on the upcoming matchup with the Vikings because Cousins is starting this game, and we're going to take a look at how Atlanta can attack Minnesota offensively. We know how good the Vikings defense is and how aggressive they are and how bad of a matchup that's likely to be for Kirk Cousins, but some maybe glimmers of hope in terms of the injury report for Atlanta and looking at some injuries for Minnesota that could be impactful in this one. So we'll take a closer look at that, talk about the Falcons defense, I'm not going to call them resurgent yet, but they did have a good game against the Chargers. We'll see if they can keep that going against a very tough to defend Minnesota offense as well. So we're going to dive into all that stuff here on today's episode of Dirty Birds and Brews. Before we do, I want to bring you guys a real quick word from our sponsor, BetOnline. Folks, BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting options, BetOnline provides you with all the action and ability to place bets on the games as they happen, with the largest selections of odds on everything from football, NBA, college football, college basketball, NHL, UFC, boxing, MMA. They've got it all there on BetOnline. And if you're interested in betting on this Falcons game, I would advise against it as always. But it does seem like 90% of the money on this game is on the Vikings, so not a lot of action on the Falcons. I wonder why. It's going to be a tough one for Atlanta. I believe they're, at the time of me recording this, Atlanta's 5.5 point underdogs to Minnesota on the road, which doesn't sound crazy. It seems pretty fair, actually, given that the Falcons have done some good things in the past, but no doubt about it. Tough matchup for Atlanta. But what are you waiting for, folks? Head to that website. It's betonline.ag today to get in on the action, and don't forget to use our promo code when you sign up. It's BELIEVE, BLEAV, just like it says in the bottom right corner there, for your welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online, the game starts here. All right, let's get into this injury report first thing. I haven't seen Thursday's report yet. I do record this on Thursday, but based on what we saw on Wednesday for the Falcons, it looks like it should be potentially good news regarding Mike Hughes with his neck injury. Again, he did practice fully last week, the day before he was ruled out, which was odd, but he's practicing fully again on Wednesday, so the idea is probably that he's going to be able to return. That would be a nice boost for this Falcons defense to get more of their corners back healthy. A number of players were injured. Drake London and Matt Judon were both rest days. Kevin King was out with a personal issue, and then Troy Anderson and Nate Lamont were both limited with their respective injuries. Zach Harrison was limited with an Achilles injury, and then Rook Orororo returned to practice on Wednesday for the first time coming off IR. He was limited with an ankle injury. Only two players missed practice. Darnell Mooney was given a rest day, and Jace McClellan is still out with his knee injury. So I think Jace McClellan's status in doubt, but the rest of these guys probably expecting them to play for Atlanta. For the Vikings, the kicker was full, long snapper full. That's good for their special teams. The ones to watch, obviously, are Stephon Gilmore, who did miss practice with a hamstring injury. That's obviously a big deal. He's a big part of their secondary. And they would have to go to former Falcon Foster Moreau as the backup for Gilmore if he was to miss time. So obviously that could be a window for Atlanta potentially to attack in the passing game if Gilmore's out. Also, safety Jay Ward was a DNP. There were also 4 important limited designations with Andrew Van Ginkel, one of their top pass rushers. He was limited with a thigh. Blake Cashman, starting linebacker, limited with a knee. Jonathan Bullard, starting defensive tackle, with a toe. And then Patrick Jones, the second another linebacker, limited with a knee. So they're definitely dealing with some stuff on defense. We'll see how those things progress. Obviously, Gilmore is the one to really watch closely in this one, given that he's such an important part of what they do coverage-wise. They really need him to be able to rely on him, given how aggressive they are up front. So we'll have to monitor that throughout the week. But otherwise, seems like both teams are fairly healthy. We'll see how these limited designations play out throughout the course of the week as well. But Atlanta at this point looking healthier coming out of the bye. The one that a lot of people thought was hurt, Kirk Cousins, given how he looked in that game against the Chargers, he's not on the injury report. So, again, team pretty adamant that he's not dealing with an injury. He said he wasn't dealing with an injury. Seems like he's not dealing with an injury. So, make of that whatever you will. But that's where that's what we're looking at as we head into Week 14 for both of these teams. Let's now move on. Take a look at how this, I guess we could call it, stagnant Falcons offense over the past 3 weeks. How does this offense get going now against their third straight top-end defensive opponent in the Minnesota Vikings? So the Falcons have had their struggles offensively. Last week, obviously against the Broncos, this team completely fell apart. They struggled a bit against the Saints, although that, they couldn't punch it in. But they were, the missed field goals really cost them in that one. But against the Chargers, this team was going up and down the field on Los Angeles. They put up a ton of yards. They just turned the ball over 4 times, which almost impossible to win when you turn the ball over 4 times, as we saw. And a lot of that was obviously Kirk Cousins' struggles. But, there are other issues with this offense beyond Kirk Cousins. But at this point, Kirk Cousins is the one that's kind of holding this whole thing back and really cost the team against the Chargers. So he's going to have to try to bounce back against one of the NFL's best pass rushes and the NFL's best run defense. The Minnesota Vikings are number 1 in yards allowed. They've allowed under 1,000 yards rushing on the season. Third in yards per carry allowed with just 3.7. Non-coincidentally, they've also faced the second fewest rushing attempts, because I think everyone knows you just can't run on this defense. Falcons are going to have to find a way to overcome that and potentially lean on other parts of their offense to get it done, because we know how inconsistent the Falcons' rushing attack has been. This is a bad matchup for them as well, so we'll see. Maybe they can introduce some more wrinkles, some more inside running perhaps, because that really is the only place that I see weaknesses on this Vikings defense. They have great edge rushers. The corners, especially with Gilmore in there, all tackle really, really well. But at linebacker, if the Vikings it looks like they may have to start Camus Grugier-Hill this week. We'll see how the injury report comes out. And then in terms of the interior, it's a little softer than the edge. So, that would probably be where you're trying to attack on the ground. But again, there's not really anywhere on this Vikings defense that's particularly vulnerable against the run. That's just maybe the best place. The passing game, the Minnesota Vikings are good against the pass. They are 8th in net yards per attempt, which is obviously great. However, they are 28th in total passing yards allowed. A lot of that has to do with the fact that they face the highest number of pass attempts in the NFL. So that's why the counting stats aren't always the best measures. When you look at the net yards per attempt, which is based on attempt, obviously, they do a good job. So don't be fooled by the 28th passing yardage allowed stat. They're also number 1 in interceptions, which seems very ominous. Seems very ominous indeed for this weekend. They have 18 picks on the year. So, I'm not feeling great about that. Overall, though, this Vikings defense, very good. 5th in scoring, 13th in yardage allowed. It's a very good defense. And yeah, it's pretty scary. They're 3rd in overall turnover percentage. This is going to be a difficult test for this Falcons offense, which really hasn't been able to get much done over the past several weeks. Atlanta's obviously the easiest path is probably if these injuries do keep Stephon Gilmore out of the lineup, you target Foster Moreau relentlessly. You try to get the ball out quick to be able to get around this pass rush and try to find some success running the ball as well. the Falcons do have, I think, the weapons to be able to have success here. Again, this could be an opportunity maybe for Kyle Pitts, but it's a bad matchup. It's a tough one for this Falcons offense to go out there and try to score against this Vikings defense. It's a very good defense. Kirk Cousins against the blitz has not fared well this year. It just feels like this is one that the Falcons are really going to have to depend on kind of keeping the Vikings from scoring too much, because I think if the Vikings get 25 plus points, it's going to be really unlikely that the Falcons are able to match that total, especially given what we've seen the last 3 weeks. So really the ticket, offensively is just try to string some drives together, try to get in the red zone when you can. And the red zone scoring, again, has been a big issue for this Falcons team. You're not going to get a lot of opportunities, so you need to take advantage of them when you do. And we will see, of course, if the Falcons can manage that. But at this point, seems like a tough matchup. Not sure that how much I trust the Falcons offense in this one. And again, it's a difficult situation for Kirk to go into, and probably what is a real bounce back opportunity for him, one that he desperately needs. It just doesn't stack up super well. But again, if Stephon Gilmore's not playing, there is a window there where maybe you can go after that corner. And maybe find some success there in an otherwise very stout overall defense here. Let's take a minute. Let's shift over to the defensive side of the ball and see how the Falcons can match up against this surprisingly good Vikings offense under a resurgent Sam Darnold. All right, so Atlanta's defense coming off arguably their best game of the season. They really got to Justin Herbert. It's really the first time they've been a consistently effective pass rush all season. We saw this Falcons defense get pressure on the Chargers pretty regularly, sack Justin Herbert 5 times. They didn't let him escape the pocket. They mixed it up. They suffocated most of the receivers, not named Ladd McConkey. But they did let Ladd McConkey go kind of crazy, even though that didn't result in a lot of offensive success overall for the Chargers. They did score just 10 points offensively. They needed that pick 6 to win that game, unfortunately, and Falcons gave it to them. But this Vikings offense, it has its issues. It's not necessarily the best offense, but what they do have is a quarterback that can make the first read really well, get the ball out to that first read really well, and the perfect target to be your first read in Justin Jefferson, who I think most would say Justin Jefferson's either the number 1 or the number 2 wide receiver in the NFL. And the Falcons, against star wide receiver talent, have just not fared very well this year. So we'll see, if the Falcons are going to try to have Terrell shadow Jefferson, what kind of coverage they're going to try to run to slow him down. But that's really the secret, is just taking away these first reads. Jordan Addison's come on for the Vikings with him being healthy as well. We'll see if Mike Hughes is back in the lineup on Addison, or if that's going to be Clark Phillips, who, again, coming off a very good game. D. Alford in the slot has kind of had an up and down season, but the slot is not really where the Vikings have had too much of their success. So, I think it's Jalen Naylor is who the Vikings are playing there, at least most of the time. So Alford's got, I think, a matchup he can handle there. The Vikings also have a good tight end in TJ Hawkinson, right? And an effective run game. This Vikings offense, again, not the most impressive, overall numbers wise. I believe they're 13th in yards, but they're 9th in scoring. This Vikings offense passing the ball 6th in yards per net yards per attempt. That's very good. And 10th in total yardage. They're effective there. 5th in passing touchdowns as well. They have struggled to run consistently, probably familiar for Falcons fans. 26th in yards per attempt, just 4 on the season. They're only 29th in rushing touchdowns and 17th in total rushing yards. So not a formidable rushing attack. They've had trouble with consistency there. This is a team that's going to try to run. They're 10th in rushing attempts. They're just not the best at it. And I think a lot of that has to do with the offensive line kind of being a mixed bag. Obviously, I think Brian O'Neill is very good at right tackle, and the Vikings unfortunately lost their starting left tackle earlier this season. They had to trade for Cam Robinson from the Jaguars, who has been fine for the most part, especially as a pass blocker, but it's still a downgrade for them from Christian Darrisaw. So the offensive line's a little bit vulnerable. Up until last week, I would have said that doesn't really matter. The Falcons aren't really going to create any pressure anyway. It doesn't matter who they play. But there could be opportunities, right? I would say the two weakest links on that offensive line are the two guards. Dalton Reisner's had to come in over the last few games. He's been okay, especially as a pass blocker. But he's been problematic as a run blocker. And then at left guard, Blake Brandel is playing for them. Don't know too much about Blake Brandel, other than that PFF thinks he's been pretty average. So, not necessarily a liability, maybe not a impact player there, but, there are some weaknesses there. Garrett Bradbury is having a good season overall, especially he's really one of their big run blockers as a pass blocker, kind of struggling this year. But, it's not a super formidable offensive line. So that's really, if the Falcons could replicate the pressure they were getting on Los Angeles, that could be an opportunity for this team. And also, if they can shut down the run, the Vikings really want to run the football. They're committed to it. So if the Falcons can make that harder, that would be great. That would help out a lot. Aaron Jones has been pretty good for them, but again, the run game as a whole has been pretty inconsistent. So tough sledding there. Really, the secret is always just, can you limit Justin Jefferson, and can you force Darnold off of his first read? Can you pressure him? Can you, cloud things up for him so it's not simple? That's really the ticket to slowing down this Vikings offense, which has been a little inconsistent. The Vikings have played a lot of close games, but the highs have been really high, and they've been certainly effective at winning those close games. So, looking at this matchup totality-wise, I wouldn't say the Falcons should be favored on either side of the ball. I mean, that's just kind of the facts. I don't really know if the Falcons defense has earned trust at all after last week. That was a step in the right direction. The Chargers offense without J.K. Dobbins struggled to run the ball a lot. Ladd McConkey was obviously hurt. They don't really have a lot of other options in terms of the passing game. So that was a pretty limited offense. Obviously, they have a great quarterback in Justin Herbert, but there's only so far he can take that by himself. So I don't know that they'll be able to replicate their success defensively against the Vikings. The hope is that they can just be a better defense overall, and even if they can't shut down the Vikings like they did the Chargers, they can at least keep it reasonable, like 20 to 25 points allowed, which is you're hoping the Falcons offense can score like 25 points and eke out a narrow win here, like a 24 to 21 sort of win. That even might be a tall order given what we've seen from the Falcons the last few weeks. They just haven't been able to score. So that's why I don't feel particularly good about this matchup. I think, offense versus defense, the Falcons defense has a chance in this one to keep it close, certainly, but maybe even have a good game. But the Falcons offense is the biggest concern, and I don't know what you expect Kirk to do better against a defense that is going to be even more aggressive, forcing him off his spot even more. And I think that's the big issue, is that he's not able to throw the ball if he doesn't have a clean pocket. Like, I think physically he's having trouble throwing the ball if he can't set his feet properly. So that just leads to the passes that we've seen. They just kind of die. And I think that's a ticket for disaster, and there's obviously schematic changes they could do to help him out. I hope that they do that. I think they could run the ball inside more. I think that would be helpful. But ultimately, I don't know. It's just like if Cousins looks like he did last week, I'm not sure you can win football games with your quarterback looking like that unless you just play bad teams, which the Falcons do play 3 bad teams to close out the year, but this Vikings team is certainly not a bad team, and I don't really feel good about this matchup at all. And unfortunately, that means I think this is going to be the end of the winning record for the Falcons as they fall to 6-7 against this Minnesota Vikings team. It's not hopeless. This Vikings team plays close games pretty much every week, no matter the opponent. The Falcons have an opportunity to win this game. It's hard. It's unlikely that they pull this off. But it's certainly a possibility, and I think most of it's going to depend on Cousins just having a strong bounce-back game where he can just kind of overcome these physical limitations by making smart decisions with the football, by reading the field and getting quickly to those hot reads and things like that, because the Vikings there's going to be space available. The Vikings are going to blitz. They're going to be as aggressive as possible. That's kind of their calling card. So we're going to need Cousins to think quickly, get the ball out quickly, and make smart decisions. And that's how you beat this Vikings defense. That's how you can. The teams that have scored a lot have been able to do that successfully. Can Kirk Cousins do it this week? Maybe. I don't really think so, but it's possible. And one thing I will say, like, I have no doubt in my mind that Kirk Cousins is trying his very best to will this team to victory, to improve what he can. There's just only so much you can do physically to overcome some of the issues I think that we're seeing from him, especially given his athletic limitations as well, and the structure of this offense. There's limits to what he can accomplish. So I think the biggest thing is that he can just make better decisions. And I'm sure he knows that. This is a veteran quarterback, but I just don't know how much is realistic to expect, especially against a defense like this. It's just not a good matchup. But again, Cousins is a veteran. He's familiar with this team and this defense. He's going back to a stadium that he's very familiar with as well. There is an opportunity here for an upset. That would obviously go a long way for Atlanta, who desperately needs wins. And if you get this one, you do give yourself I think it's desperately needed breathing room, because I don't know that you can really realistically think you're going to go 4-0 to close the season. You need to have a slip-up game somewhere that you can afford to have. And if you get this win, now you have that opportunity to slip up another time. So we'll have to see how the injury report plays out. I think obviously if Stephon Gilmore is going to miss this game, that does open the door for this passing game a bit more. That's a matchup you can target, but ultimately, it's going to be a really tough game. Not one that I think the Falcons are well set up to win. So they're just going to have to rely on opportunities, take advantage of them, play clean football, and hope to luck into some turnovers. That's the one thing that I would say is that, Sam Darnold has been quite good in his resurgence season. He has thrown 10 interceptions. So he is a bit turnover prone. Not to the level that Kirk has been, but there's opportunity there. And I think turnovers plus Kirk bouncing back is probably the ticket to the Falcons finding a way to win this game. So we'll hope that they can do it, certainly. But it's going to be a tough game. And it's going to be hopefully an exciting one, hopefully a good one. Even if the Falcons don't win, they could give us a lot of hope for the future by playing a competitive game against the Vikings and looking like a team that deserves to be in the playoff conversation. They haven't really looked like, last week I would say they looked like that outside the quarterback, so Cousins can get it together. There's an opportunity here for this team to still go on a run, make the playoffs, but the window is closing. It's closing fast, so hopefully they can figure out a way to do it. I sure hope they do, and hope Cousins can bounce back. Again, like the guy, I'm sure he's doing everything he can. We'll see how feasible it is, and good luck to him. Good luck to everybody out there. Let's have a healthy game too for all these guys. So thank you guys so much for joining us here on the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast for the Falcons vs. Vikings Week 14 game preview. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe on YouTube. If you're a podcast enjoyer, please leave that 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. That really helps the show grow. It's really important. So if you don't mind, we do really appreciate it. Leave a comment too. We love to hear from you guys. If you got something to say about this matchup, any details, feel free to leave those there. Appreciate you guys. You can follow me, Kevin Knight, at Falcoholic Kevin on both Twitter and Blue Sky. Check out thefalcoholic.com for that terrific written content. You can support the show on Patreon, patreon.com/falcoholiclive, as well as on YouTube with the channel memberships. And yeah, we appreciate it. Thanks everyone for joining us. We will see you next time. Thanks again to BetOnline for sponsoring today's episode. We will see you next time on the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast for our Week 14 post-game show on Sunday. Until then, guys, have a great weekend. We'll see you Sunday.